I wanted to find a way that students could locate their Do Now at the very beginning of Zoom class and not be bogged down by the confusion of Google Classroom that sometimes happens when there are many things in a stream or a feed. So I created with my co-teacher this Google site, and front and center on this site as the first page would be our Do Now page. Students click on it and they will know that the current day's Do Now for that class will be embedded by us in the morning, and all they have to do is to click on this arrow and it will bring them directly to that day's Do Now in a Google form. And I'm finding that a Google form is more streamlined as it brings all of the data immediately to us as their teachers in a Google Sheet, and we can collect multiple days worth of Do Nows. Even if they're in different Google forms, they can populate into the same Google Sheet. So I just want to show you really quickly how to do that. Let's say I go into what is my big Google Sheet that is for my entire class for a time span that I decide. So I decided to take from 9:22 to 11:15 for my ELA 10 honors course. I created a Google Sheet, this big sheet for that course. I titled it, and this is where I'm going to want all of my Google Forms for each daily Do Now to populate. And so how do I do that? So I do that through multiple Google Forms. So let's say the first Google Form is 9:22. I have it here. I would then go to Responses up in the top middle. Next to Questions, I would click on the 3 vertically aligned dots and select Response Destination. And instead of the default, I would want to go to Select Existing Spreadsheet, click Select, and then that's going to go to our big master sheet for this class. I click it and click Select. And that tells me that all the data from this 9:22 Do Now will populate into the first tab of this Google Sheet. Admittedly, the most tedious part of this is the setup, and the setup does include creating copies of Do Nows. So if I wanted to plan this out ahead of time through 9:25, then I would take this Google form, I would make a copy of it, and I would do my next form as 9:25. Click OK. After I've made the copy, I definitely want to make sure I go up to Responses and designate that this data from this form will populate my big Google Sheet for that class. So I have to make sure I do that, otherwise it will not. And when I go back to my big Google Sheet, I do see at the very bottom, 9:22 is first, then 9:23, then 9:24. So yes, I've made all of these forms. It's just tedious to make a copy of each form and then change the data output so that it goes to this master sheet. But my hope is that if I do this ahead of time, all that logistical work will be done, and it will make it easier for my students to do the work of the Do Now rather the work of locating the Do Now. Even from a classroom perspective where students would come in and have to locate their notebook and then something to write with and then get situated, I'm hoping that that is all now streamlined as students are able to go right to the Google site, click on their class, and see that the daily Do Now is already embedded. However, that leaves just one logistical piece for absent students or students who miss the Do Now time because they come in late to class. What can they do? And so that's why I have created a running record. It's just a quick table, and the table is already mapped out through November 15th. And I've decided that I'm going to make it a hyperlinked document, and then I'm going to make sure that each Google form is linked into this table so that all students have to do is they can locate this form on our Google site right here, the Daily Do Now running record. And I have hyperlinked all of our Do Now so that if they were absent on the 24th or they were late to Zoom class, they could click on this link and that will directly bring them to the 924 Do Now form, the Google form, and they submit it, and then their work goes into this big Excel sheet, Google Sheet, and 924 is linked here at the bottom. It's important for my co-teacher and I to make sure that our students can quickly and easily access all the material they need without the barrier of a congested Google Classroom, and they are able to do that through a Google site. It was also important for us to be able to respond to students quickly, and we found that a Google form would be the best possible way to do that, as the data is tracked and timestamped, and we are then able to read students' work in a timely manner.